So we're going to do a torture test review on one of the budget knives that I have reviewed already on the channel. In fact, it was my first review on the channel for the Sitivien ST102. This is a knife that is supposed to come in a D2 steel, and I've kind of wondered how that D2 would hold up. And so I've bought a couple of the Sitivien knives at this point, and of course, even cheap knives hold up okay to like opening, packages or envelopes or something like that. But I just want to see how this would do if you were carrying it in a manner that would maybe put a little more, a little more wear and tear on the knife, how it would hold up to that kind of abuse. So we're going to go ahead and do that today. I did just touch up the edge a little bit. It was fairly sharp to begin with, but just to kind of show you that, this is razor sharp, no problem there. That's thin notebook paper, and it slices through with no problem. I don't expect it to have that edge by the time we're done with the testing, but that's kind of our starting point. I did actually notice when I was kind of touching up the edge that the grind is not at a completely equal angle on the tip. So the tip of this knife is not as sharp as the rest of it up to about here, because I would have had to reprofile the edge to get that angle back, and I just didn't want to do that right now at this point. At some point I will go ahead and do that. But it's still fairly sharp on the tip, just not as sharp as the rest of the knife up to about that point there. So we're going to go ahead and do some testing on this knife to see how this Chinese D2 steel actually holds up to some heavy use. Alright, well, it's pretty cold outside today, so I was going to do this test outside, but I moved it indoors, so hopefully, I don't know if these folding chairs make the most stable platform, but we're going to go ahead and see what we can do here. I want to do just a few different cutting tests. So the first that I'm going to do is actually just cutting some somewhat heavier gauge wire that I have here, speaker wire, just to see how it does with cutting through something like wire, which is something you may actually use a knife for. It's not the best thing to use a knife for, but sometimes you're in a position where you find yourself needing to cut wire and a knife is what you have. I've done it plenty of times. Should be able to handle this, so we're going to check that out here. All right, so you can see there that, it takes a little bit of force there, but it is cutting through the wire just fine. So no problems there. I think that's, like I said, that's to be expected. The question is it doing any damage to the blade? And I don't know that I'm going to get this to focus very well. But no, from what I can see, cutting through the softer wire like that is not doing any damage whatsoever to the blade. So you can see if you need to use it for something like that, it has the ability to do it. Now I will mention that I noticed when I was sharpening this knife that it's got a 21-degree angle or edge. So, a little thinner edge will make it cut better, but hopefully the little thicker edge will make it stand up to the abuse a little better. So I thought that was fine that it had 21. I didn't mess with that. I just left it what it was. But it cuts through the wire just fine. Of course, I could sit here and see how much wire I could cut, but that's not the point of this test because I want to go on to test some other stuff. So it does just fine on the wire test. So the next thing I want to test here is the tip strength of the blade. A good way to do that is by stabbing into the board and then doing a twisting or jerking motion to pull it out. So we're going to go ahead and try that. I'm actually going to have to get on the other side of the camera here to do that. All right, let's see how that goes. All right, so it's doing okay in this board here, but I'm also going to try it in something a little harder. I actually have a piece of mesquite here, and anybody who knows anything about mesquite wood knows how hard that is. So I want to go ahead and see, first of all, I may have a hard time even puncturing into this, but we're going to see what we can do. All right, so you can see there that I'm not able to get too deep. I did get a couple in there that I was able to kind of get some torque on the tip of the blade. No damage to the blade at all. No damage to the point. Still as sharp as it was when I started. So you can see, that's not doing any damage to it. So that's good. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the next thing. All right, so the next thing we're going to try to do is do some batoning. Again, this is not something you traditionally do with a folding knife, especially a budget EDC style knife, but we just want to see how it holds up. I am going to go ahead for this one. Really probably should have done it for the tip test. I'm going to go ahead and put on some gloves, just in the off chance I have any kind of accident where the lock fails and the blade wants to close on my hands. At least it has a little bit of extra protection there, but we're going to go ahead and you can see this is some pretty dry wood, so it's not having any trouble with that. I didn't bring a whole lot in with me, so if I wanted to keep testing it, I'd have to get some more, but it seems to be splitting that just fine. So let me go ahead, and I'm actually going to run out and just grab another piece or two, just to see if we have anything that's maybe a little harder to get through, maybe not quite so well seasoned, and with such a straight grain, see how it does with that. Alright, I went out and got some mesquite wood. This stuff is notoriously difficult to split. Now I got a couple smaller pieces here just so that they could fit in frame better. They'll still give me an idea of how it does, so. I'm going to have to get a little more of that tip sticking out so I can follow through it. Well, that worked alright. Let's go ahead and grab another piece here. See how this does. Alright, actually wasn't too bad. Then I do have a larger piece here that has a knot on the bottom, which hopefully I'll be able to still get in frame as I'm hammering on it. We're going to see how it does with a little bit bigger piece. Alright, well, I got too far up on it that time. I was hitting the handle scales. Right there, I should go by. Yeah, this piece may be too big for the knife to actually go through. Yeah, see, my blade's not long enough to go through that, which is why I was trying to get some pieces that were not quite so wide. But it seems to be splitting it all right. If it was just a little bit longer, you're going to run into issues trying to use something like this to baton wood that's this. Wood that's that wide. That being said, it does appear to be going in without too much problem. Now I can feel, when I'm stressing down on this thing, I can feel that liner lock buckling. So I will say, hopefully I'm in the frame, that thing is pretty close to failing right there. If I put a lot of pressure on that, that thing's going to close on my hand. Alright. I'm getting it back out. is the challenge. All right, well, there we go. Now I can tell you, I definitely, after hammering on it, especially hammering on it there, back where the back of the blade there, I can feel some rattle in that knife. So there is blade play that was not there before. A whole lot of it. So what I'm going to have to do, I'm going to go ahead and take these gloves off. What I'm going to have to do is, once I'm done with all this, I will go ahead and try to tighten up that pivot pin and see if that resolves some of that blade play side to side. But right now, I don't know if you can hear that, but there's definitely rattle. There's movement in that blade that was not there before. Now that being said, liner locks are not, they're not known for being super robust. So the fact that me torquing all that pressure on it, I could feel it starting to, like it wanted to buckle. I could make that lock fail if I wanted to. Now my point in doing all this testing isn't to intentionally destroy the knife. I want to see what its limits are, but I'm not going to try to intentionally destroy it. So I can tell without having to do it that liner lock is not going to withstand a whole lot of pressure before that fails. Now, one of the things I did want to try, though, is a couple of spine wax and see how it holds up to that. So I will put my gloves back on for that. And we will go ahead. We're just going to use this here. Let me go ahead and adjust the camera just a little bit, so hopefully you can see that better. We're going to go ahead and do some spine wax right here. And there it just folded on me. You can see there it hit right there and got a little bit of a cut in the glove. So that's what I was worried about. So what was that, 3 or 4? So for the sake of safety, I may need to figure out a better way to do this. I know that glove protected me there, but yeah, see? Okay, so definitely when you're using the you're using a liner lock, that's the weakness of the liner lock right there. You've got an engagement that'll stop it from just accidentally closing on your hand, but you do a lot of abuse to it, spine wax, something like that, or like what I was torquing on it earlier, you know, you're going to be prone to failure. So that's not overly surprising. I mean, I would love to see it be able to withstand that, but again, it's one of the reasons I'm not a huge fan of liner locks, just because they're not overly robust. All right, so we've kind of tested this. The point looks good. We've tested the lock a little bit. We can see that the lock leaves a little bit to be desired. The next thing I wanted to test is actual edge retention. This thing's so loose. You know, I hate to do it in the middle of the test, but for safety's sake, I think I'm going to go ahead and stop the video for a minute just to go and grab my Torx bit so I can just tighten up that pivot pin a little bit so I don't have quite so much rattle here. So we'll be right back. Alright, so I went ahead and tightened that up just a little bit so there's less rattle in it. Like I said, just kind of for a safety purposes. Next thing I want to try to do here is open a can of corn. I've actually used a knife to open a can before. It's one of the hardest uses, I think, that most knives go through that is reasonable and, you know, may actually occur in real life. A lot of times, you know, you'll see people do these tests and they're doing all kinds of abuse, but it's not something that in real life they would probably encounter. Finding yourself needing to open a can, not having a can opener. Not as likely, but it has happened. I've had it happen when I was out camping, forgot to bring out a can opener, and so had to use a knife to open it. So it does happen. So we're going to go ahead and just see how this thing does. Can of corn. Just for the sake of making less of a mess, I'm going to go drain that real quick just to get the juice out, and then we'll come back and finish opening it. So I'll be right back. All right, you can see that all I've done is drain it. It's the same can, same amount of damage. I changed the camera angle here a little bit so that you can see a better view of what's actually going on. Now, I'm not going to lie. It has been a long time since I tried to use a knife to open a can. So I'm not going to claim to be the best at it. All right, and there you are. Can is open. So the next thing I want to see is, after all that, how much damage have we actually done to the blade. So I'm going to check that out and see how sharp this thing is. So I got to say, there's not a whole lot of really visual damage to the blade. Again, I don't know how well I can get this thing to focus, but I can tell you there's just the slightest bit of glinting here where a lot of the work was being done. But not too bad. So, and I was running that blade the whole way down, at least occasionally while I was doing that. So I don't know that it's still going to be razor sharp. Yeah, you can see it's tearing. It's not slicing smoothly like it was before, especially when it hits right up here. So you're not still razor sharp, but just by feeling that edge, that is still plenty sharp enough to cut. So, for example, let me grab that wire that I was using earlier, and we'll see how it does cutting the wire. So yeah, you can still push cut through the wire. Again, you got to put a bit of pressure on it, but I had to do that before, even when it was razor sharp. So it's still definitely a functional edge, still plenty sharp. It's just not going to shave or slice paper as pretty as maybe what, you know, it did before. So the last test that I'm going to do is probably the most abusive thing that I'm going to do to this knife. And that's because I want to see how strong that steel is, how strong that edge actually is. So what I'm going to do is actually, let me dump some of that out. I'm actually going to try to cut through, or cut, I'm not even going to say cut through. I don't really care so much what it's going to do to the nail. I want to see how bad it damages the blade. I'm going to drive this nail, or this knife into the nail, just to see what we get on the blade. So I would fully expect that would put a divot in the blade, and there, right where I did it, there is a little bit of rolling there. It didn't chip, and it actually didn't even roll that bad, but there is a little bit of a roll there. So let me go ahead and grab another one. I'll try to maybe hit a little slightly different spot. Okay, so it's clearly driving it down into the wood. Oh yeah, you can definitely see where it's rolling or putting little flat spots in the blade, but it's really not that bad. Not for a $25 to $30 knife. Yeah, I gotta say, based on just this testing, I gotta say this is probably pretty decent D2. I don't, you know, I'm kind of surprised it's held up as well as it did. So when you're looking at the different aspects of the knife, there's obviously the lock is its weak point, that liner lock, and again, that's true of any liner lock. So you've definitely got an issue there. If you're going to be abusing it, you got to be careful, because you got to know that thing could shut on your hand. But as far as the actual blade itself and the abuse that you could put that blade through, even hammering into that nail, those little flat spots or divots are going to be really easy for me to just go ahead and grind out of there, buff out of there, and get sharpened. So it did well on the point test. I wasn't able to snap the point. It did well on the batoning, other than, again, that lock. The spine wax, it obviously didn't do good on at all. That liner lock is definitely weak. One last thing I want to try on the point, since I wasn't able to get too deep even into the mesquite wood. We're going to go ahead and see how well it works driving it through the can multiple times, and we'll see what that looks like. But otherwise, I'm kind of leaning toward this is fairly impressive. All right, y'all, before I do the final test here on seeing how well this point holds up to being hammered through a can multiple times, just want to take a moment to ask that if you're enjoying my videos or enjoying this video, that you like and subscribe to the channel. I am trying to put out as much content as I can that you might find interesting. One other thing I want to point out before we wrap up the video as well is, with all the blade play and everything I said about, I will say that the blade, having to tighten it up to get rid of some of that blade play, it doesn't quite flick out with the same authority that it did before. It still opens smoothly. It's not like it's hard to open, but it definitely has a different feeling to it. So all the hammering and abuse that we've done with the batoning and the spine wax has definitely affected the locking mechanism, and as well that ball bearing action a little bit as well. Now I might have some grit and dust in there from some of the different stuff that we've done. That was some pretty dirty wood I was batoning through. So my guess is I have quite a bit of dust in there as well. But just wanted to point those things out, and then I want to go ahead and finish up here just by testing that point a little bit more on a can, just to see if puncturing the can multiple times in any way dulls that point. All right, so once again for this test, I am going to wear a glove just because I don't really trust that that lock's not going to fail, even as I'm trying to drive it into the can. But I just want to see what happens, if anything, to the point. So that went all the way through both layers into wood. That's into wood. And now obviously, a lot of people will drive through maybe some sheet metal or something like that. Again, that's not even realistic for what a knife is meant to be used for. So going through both sides of this can is honestly more than I would probably do in normal daily use of a knife. So if the point's going to stand up to that, then it's going to stand up to whatever I throw at it. So I gotta say, just from hammering on it there, you could definitely feel that weakness in the lock every time I hit it again. That lock just, it's got some wobble. You can see it there, top to back, front to back there. Not so much side to side anymore because I tightened that up, but you got a little bit of wobble this way. So I definitely bent or damaged that liner lock when I was doing the batoning and trying to wrench it out, and then also doing the spine wax. But otherwise, as far as the point goes, yeah, that point's still sharp. There's not even a flat spot on it. So going through the can didn't do any damage. Cutting the can didn't really do any damage. There's not even really scratches on the blade. The only thing you can see on the blade is the two spots where I hammered the nail. You can see that it did fold there a little bit. You've got some flat spots there from hammering into the nail, which again is not something you would ever do on purpose. But if you're using your knife, it's possible that you could end up, slamming it into something that was metal or harder. And basically, that's all the worse it's going to do to your knife. So I gotta say, guys, if it wasn't for that lock, I would be blown away by this knife, by how well it's handled all this. The lock is definitely not impressive, but again, it's a liner lock, and I don't really know any liner lock that's overly impressive. So I don't really fault the liner lock for not impressing me, because I've never been overly impressed with the liner lock. But the steel itself in the blade for a Chinese-made knife, you know, hey guys, I've got nothing bad to say about it. I definitely feel like you can use this knife as an everyday carry knife, and you're not going to have any issues as far as the steel holding up. Now, edge retention, obviously, I didn't really test that super well today. And the reason I didn't is because basically any budget knife you're going to have to sharpen, right? And you're going to have to sharpen it more than you would a high-end knife with a high-end steel. So I kind of figured I know what I'm getting into when I get a budget knife. I know that if I use it a lot, I'm going to have to sharpen it a lot. And I'm okay with that. That doesn't really bother me when I'm only paying $20 to $30 for a knife. So the Sitiviens, I got to say, guys, I'm impressed. It held up really well. I'll probably buy more of these in the future if I'm looking for cheap budget knives. Like I said, just be aware, the lock is there to just keep the blade from accidentally closing on your hand in usual, like everyday normal use. If you're doing something very abusive to it, I would recommend wearing some kind of protection on your hand because that blade is probably going to shut on you. So that's all I got for today, guys. Hope you like it.